All right, why don't I get started? Before I get started, does anyone have any questions on the course or anything that's going on right now? As I get through, feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand. What I hope to do tonight is I want to highlight some things on stress management. I have some ideas to share with you on a concept for mindfulness, uh, on the concept of mindfulness that I'm going to share. I thought it might be good to share some of these thoughts in terms of when we're dealing with the stress management. Um, so let me bring up some things here. Um, a lot of times we don't think of stress as a big management skill or leadership skill, managing stress, but it really is. Uh, you know, there are billions of dollars tied up in lost time around stress, disease related to stress. Um, just this slide I threw up there from the book, a lot of coronary disease, infections. Um, all of us are susceptible to this, and it's important to think about how we're managing stress in our lives. We're probably in a interesting time right now with this COVID crisis, and stress is potentially coming from a number of different sources. But it is important to think about some both our physical and psychological responses to this, but also ways to effectively manage it. In the module this week on stress, there's I know Dr. Jim Smither talks on one set of slides about some of the physical effects of stress, and there's good video on a good TED talk on stress. Um, in terms of thinking about stress, one of the things I'm going to chat a little bit about tonight has to do with stressors, or where does it come from? And I throw this model up here. I think this slide's a good one to think about when you think about stress and what's happening in your life with stress. I think it's really helpful to identify where the stress is coming from. You'll hear me a lot in this course talking about pausing and reflecting. It's a pretty important skill. And as you're experiencing stress in your lives, where you have to organize and manage stress, I think it's real important to think about where is that stress coming from. So I want to talk a little bit about that. And then some of our reactions are both physical and psychological to stress. And then there's ways for all of us to develop some resiliency to this. There's physical things we can do, a lot of diet, exercise, yoga, all kinds of things like that. A lot of psychological things we can do, and a lot of social things. So when you think about stress in your life, where's it coming from? And depending on the source, might give some indication of ways to deal with it. And then down below there, there's some different kinds of ways to react to stress. Some reactive strategies are more short-term and temporary. Proactive strategies are really looking at developing resiliency. Inactive strategies are trying to develop permanent approaches. Of course, one of the best ways to deal with stress is eliminate it if you can. Let me run through some of the sources of stress. And I think it's important to think about this. And as I'm talking about it, think about it for yourself. Um, where is, what types of stress might you be experiencing? One is a biggie, a real biggie is time stressors. There's too much to do in too little time, or there's feelings of work overload, or you don't feel like you control much of the time at your disposal. Are other people controlling your time? So when we talk about time management, we're actually, the whole concept, the whole topic of time management has to do with managing stress. Uh, so are you experiencing time stressors? Another one, I think, which is particularly debilitating at times, are what I call encounter stressors, just stress with other people. Uh, at work, do you have conflict among the roles different people are playing? Do you have to rely on other people for you to do your job? Are you getting the kinds of support that you need, physical, emotional, whatever? When you have disagreements with people, are they around issues or are they around interpersonal kinds of things? Interpersonal kinds of things are the ones that really are draining. Um, I sometimes think white collar jobs, in many ways, where we're dealing with people all the time, are some of the most debilitating types of stress that we deal with. So a lot of your stress is related to encounter. Another one is situational stressors. And right now, we're going through some big ones. With COVID-19 is probably would fall under this category of a situational stressor. Or are you in unfavorable working conditions? Or are you experiencing rapid change? Are you concerned about job loss or takeover of a company or finding a job? These are all situational stressors that we encounter. And then finally, a biggie is anticipatory stressors. These are related to anxiety about future things that haven't happened yet, worried about things that are going to happen, worried about projects you have to get done, fear of certain things happening, just things you see into the future. Most of our stressors fall under one of those four categories in our life. So what I encourage people to do is big first step, if you're experiencing any stress, kind of identify what's the source of it, where's it coming from. And so some of the ideas around eliminating types of stressors are, if you're dealing with time, you might think about time management, delegating work, building up your emotional intelligence, and collaboration and team building, maybe ways to eliminate some encounter stressors. Maybe try and redesign your work might be a way to eliminate some situational stressors. Anticipatory, think about that things that you have to do into the future, and maybe set some goals and intermediate goals. So goal setting and planning are big ways to deal with anticipatory stress. Let me stop there for a minute. How many of us are here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8. Why don't I break us into three groups, and why don't you just maybe I'll go for about 5 minutes and let you share with each other maybe some of the how would you identify stressors that are hitting at you right now? So maybe I'll go for about, I'll break into 3 breakout rooms, and I'll go for about 5 minutes and let you just talk about some stressors you might be experiencing in a smaller group, and what the source of them, of those stressors are. All of you, hi everyone.
Hello.
Any any type of stressor seem more prevalent in your smaller groups?
We said workload. Workload seemed to be the big thing. My industry completely collapsed, so the workload dried up. Whereas with Alexa, she mentioned that the workload was very high, and same with Angela. They're both and John. They're all in the medical industry, so COVID hit, and they all had their own separate pieces to that.
How about some others?
Yeah, this is Ajit. So when we talked about, there are like 2-3 key points. One is balancing the work and life priorities and commitments.
Okay.
Second thing is juggling too many things at the same time. The next one is basically managing elder and experienced team members to get higher buy-in in innovative ideas and stuff. And the last one is basically when the next level, right, committing to the business certain things which are unreasonable and unrealistic. And that commitment really put heavy burden on the team, pretty much everyone. So those kind of 4, areas.
Any other groups? I think just a final thought on that is, as you are looking to deal with the stress, it's important to think about what the source of it is, and it might be good to take down a little worksheet, put these 4 out there, and if you're feeling particular stress, identify where it's coming from. I asked you to, I just thought I'd run through a couple of the thoughts on, I'd asked you to take the social readjustment rating scale. Basically, it's what that scale is all about is life events that you're experiencing, job change, death, and there's so many points there. This came from a couple of the source of this, origin of this was from cardiologists who began to notice a correlation between life events people were having and illness and sickness. And not, this isn't saying that you're going to get sick necessarily or ill if your points are pretty high here when you do that scale. It's saying though that there is a probability that you may. I just wanted to spend some time on the type A personality. If you took the one, in the that's in the textbook that's with my management lab, it only measures 3 areas. The one I gave you as part of the module, if you download and take it, it measures you in 4 areas. And the one that you took with my management lab measures impatience, urgency, competitiveness, and over-involvement in work or life imbalance. It also, the one I gave you, adds the dimension of hostility and anger. And in the U.S., this type A personality is a really common, and it's really common in our culture, I believe, our hustle bustle culture. So when you do this, I think it's think about if you took the one that I gave you, if you score 12 or above, that's a tendency toward type A in any of those categories. The one that that you really need to worry about is if your anger seems to be high or your hostility score seems to be high. That's the one that's the big risk factor for heart disease. Sorry. A lot of times, your type A tendencies may lead to some stress in your life. Many of us, or many of you who are high in achievement and really self-driven, you may be higher in type A, very successful, but it may bring some stress with it. It's just important to understand that. I'm not saying change, I'm just saying it's important to have a sense of if you have a tendency toward the type A personality. It does play a role in how we cope with and experience stress. The burnout survey is another one that you took. I think it's important to look at this. It's measuring you on 3 areas: emotional exhaustion, depersonalization. Emotional exhaustion is you feel like you're at the end of your rope, or you're worn out or overwhelmed. Those numbers up there are some averages that I took from a couple other classes that I've done here. Depersonalization, when you tend to be distancing yourself from other people. It's almost like the bunker mentality, which sometimes happens when we're highly moving toward burnout, or you begin sometimes to have a reduced personal accomplishment. You feel like you're not getting things done, you're not performing well, and it may be causing some of that. So take a look at this one too. We think, and I think this is pretty important. If some of these things are happening, I may have to step back and see, are there some things I can do, maybe more exercise, practicing yoga, you name it. We talked about basically what I'm hitting tonight, some highlights of things that I thought were important. In the textbook, you'll find the concept of life balance. There's an exercise at the back. I think there's a lot to this life balance. And depending on how you kind of break out your life in terms of physical activities or cultural or work, is that life balance where you want it to be? And it might be good for you to draw this circle for yourself with all the activities you would put in that life balance circle. Are you doing things that you like to do that give you satisfaction? So I would recommend, kind of taking a look at that at that life balance exercise. Some people would think it's not events that cause stress. It's it's what we think of events that causes stress. So what is stressful to me might not be stressful to you. So cognitions play a big role in stress. What we think is stress. So some of the things, again, I'm not going to go through them. The textbook lays out some good stuff there on some physical activities. Some of the psychological is, take a look at the balanced lifestyle. Some of the relaxation stuff, yoga. Try to deal with some type A personalities you might have. That I know there's an assessment in the textbook I didn't ask you to take on flourishing, but there's some thoughts around developing a hardy personality. Some things you can do socially are having mentors and building up teams, developing your emotional intelligence. These are all social activities that would help you develop some resiliency. The hardy personality is basically you're trying to gain or at least feel some control in your life, and you're feeling a little bit committed and involved in what you're doing, and you try and feel challenged with experiences. I'm going to talk a little bit about the concept of mindfulness as it relates to the development of a hardy personality. So a lot of times these notions here of a hardy personality are also what people think about when they think about happiness. And what is happiness? Well, happiness is feeling one with what you're doing. That's what it means by being in the flow, or doing things that challenge you. Again, I won't spend a lot of time on that. Other things to think about in developing some social resiliency is maintaining and developing friendships and relationships. I highly recommend in your career finding a mentor. I have always in my career had someone I could go to. Again, this is not something that it's something that you don't go out and dial up a mentor, but it's very useful to find people in your life where that can be guides, coaches, being able to work and develop teams. Unfortunately, one of the areas I'm not going to be able to get into as much in this course is some stuff around teams and developing teams, but that's certainly an area to look at. Sorry about that. There's a great concept in a book by Stephen Covey. I don't know if you've familiar with that book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He has a concept, of an emotional bank account. And that concept is developing a bank account of our relationships, or where you want to try and, in your work relationships, make a lot of deposits in that bank account, treating people with honesty, courteous, kindness, and minimize withdrawals from it, being disrespectful or not keeping promises, etc. If you're able to develop big emotional bank accounts, people are going to be very willing to let you make some withdrawals from that at times. People are going to give you the benefit of the doubt. I kind of really like the concept. Encounter stressors can be dealt with by greatly reducing and developing strong ties with people. Again, spending a little bit on emotional intelligence. I know you took that survey. Think about, and I'll comment on as we get to emotional intelligence as we move forward. I have a great book I'm going to recommend to you either tonight or one of these times. It's called No Hard Feelings. It's one of the best books I've seen written on emotions in the workplace. This is critical. I really urge you to think a lot about some of the emotional issues and assessments that we took. The personality inventory gets at some of these. That emotional intelligence survey, it measures you, that survey I asked you to take measures you in 4 areas. One is, do you recognize your own emotions? 2, how well do you regulate or manage them? 3rd, how well do you support or recognize them in others? And how well do you work with others or manage that emotional relationship with others? So I'd recommend putting a little time and thought onto this. A national survey found that workers who described their supervisor as supportive and interpersonally competent had lower rates of burnout, lower stress levels, lower incidence of stress-related illness, higher productivity, more loyalty, more efficiency in their work. Another thought, I talked about cognitive. A lot of times you can reduce stress by reframing it cognitively. Say to yourself, I've solved similar problems before. I can do it now. Hey, in the long run, 100 years from now, it's no big deal. Or, hey, I've had a lot of success in the past when I've dealt with this. I'm sure I'll handle this well. Or let me turn this into a learning situation. So there are a lot of cognitive ways of starting to think about and deal with stress. I had you take the procrastinator survey. I'm starting to get into a little bit of time. A lot of us, when you take this survey, you'll notice at the bottom, this is one that's in the instructor manual that's not in the textbook, but I've had students like this survey quite a bit, and you may be guilty of procrastination. That certainly can add to stress in your life. When we talk about managing time, one of the things that I have found very helpful when you think about your life, almost every task that you do can fit somewhere on this quadrant. And this quadrant has the 2 axes on it. Is one axis is how urgent is the task you're doing? How quickly does it need to be done? And the other axis is importance. How important is the action? And if you're looking at this, up there in the first quadrant are things that are urgent and important. These are things that are coming at you immediately, that need immediate attention, a crisis, an emergency, a pressing problem, a deadline you have today. In the second quadrant, and let me cover the second quadrant later. In the third quadrant are things that are urgent but not important. You getting your email buzzed, or a lot of popular activities, or interruptions, or some meetings that you may have to attend. These are things that are urgent, but maybe not important. Over in quadrant 4 are the things that aren't urgent and not important. And these are where a lot of time wasters fit. Junk mail, Twitter, Facebook, going through the emails, a lot of mindless TV shows we may watch that help us procrastinate. But the quadrant I want to focus on is number 2. And this is the area where most of us get in trouble. It's the area of things that are extremely important but not urgent. These are the things that are important to us. We got to exercise more. Maybe I got a diet, or I want to read that book, or I really need to do a certain hobby, and like maybe some of the life balance things fit in here. These are things that aren't urgent. Maybe a project that's due 6 months from now. These are the things that need our attention, but we tend to put off. And these sometimes tend to be the types of things that might bring richness, heartiness to our lives. So take a look. I would recommend this kind of device, or this kind of quadrant, to think about activities you're doing in your life. And almost every single activity you do in a day, you could fit here somewhere. If you want to improve your time management, some of the things that there's a lot of good, a lot of good techniques out there. Your company may have ways to help with your time management. That might be a skill you want to improve your organization ability. But I really recommend kind of thinking of activities you do in one of these 4 areas. In terms of managing your time effectively, it's real important that you devote time to activities that are important but not urgent. That's at number 2 quadrant. Don't always let others define what is urgent and important. And you got to start to develop the ability, or think about developing the ability, to say no. So, again, think about how you're dealing with that number 2 quadrant. Just quickly on this time management discussion, I want to distinguish between effective and efficient time management. Almost all of the books you're going to read and all of the self-help stuff you're going to look at, and maybe your company has these programs, training programs that you can go work on time management. Almost every one of them deals with efficient time management. There are a lot of great things out there to help with that. How do you use your time every day? What techniques are helpful? Where we don't think about time management is the effective time management. And I think if you're going to manage this skill, you've got to really do both. Look at efficient things you can do, but look at effective. And being effective means spending time on important matters that aren't urgent. It means being able to distinguish between important and urgent. Results rather than methods necessarily are your focus. And don't feel guilty for saying no. So when you're thinking of effective, think of those things. What's important to you in life? What do you value? That's when some of those things come in when you're thinking about effective time management. What are you passionate about? What do you want to be remembered for? What do you want to have accomplished? What principles about life do you follow? So those are just some of my thoughts on stress and time management. I just wanted to highlight just what some of my thinking is on, or some things I've run into that I find pretty important. And this is an area, remember, I want you to identify by next week a skill that you want to work on for the rest of this semester. A number of you may pick maybe something to do with stress management or time management, and that's fine. I find the textbook particularly helpful in this chapter with just a lot of things you can do. There are a ton of excellent suggestions on techniques for time management. Before I end, I'm going to have a little discussion on mindfulness before I end, and just to tweak your thinking a little bit on this topic. But before I do that, is there anyone do you have any questions about time and stress? Anything you've read? Any comments you want to make? Feel free to just jump in and
in reference to your framing thing, in my company, we tend to look at RFT, which is when you reframe the way that you actually hear a word. If you're a child and you hear the word no, and it's a constant negative, you're never going to view it as a positive. So it's just kind of reframing the way that words are said and how you view them, even if it's, your subconscious.
Okay. I believe there's a lot to that thought of reframing how we view things or how we view a problem. Any other thoughts? Let me share with you some thoughts on this topic of mindfulness. And well, let me just share one idea. What mindfulness is all about, I'll bring this up. Trying to figure out what I want to show first. Mindfulness, you may have been hearing about it. It's kind of becoming more and more into the fore of thinking. You're seeing a lot of police departments and emergency room people and ambulance, just all kinds of people in different jobs like that, getting training in this mindfulness, the notion of mindfulness. And I thought I would just lay out what it is. What a big part of the focus is, how do you bring yourself into the moment right now? I've just read, I just finished a great book called by Maria Kornikova. She became in 1 year a professional poker player. She's a psychologist. And she wanted to learn about decision making and how do you deal with all the things in your life. I think it's called The Big Bluff. And basically a great deal of what she had to be able to do was corral her emotional mind and her rational mind in the moment and being able to exist in the moment. And a lot of times in terms of decision making requires that we be able to step back, be able to reset, be able to pause and consider a number of things. And that's what really mindfulness is all about, is giving us that ability to pause in order to consider and reflect. Basically, in general, the concept is Um, we have a rational mind and an emotional mind. You've heard us talk about left brain, right brain. And the rational mind is the part of our mind that is cool, rational, task focused. When we're in what we call reasonable mind, you're ruled by facts, reason, logic, pragmatics. Values and feelings are not important. And the other extreme, and this is sometimes called dialectical thinking, the other extreme is the emotional mind. The emotional mind is hot, mood dependent, emotion focused. When in emotion mind, you're ruled by your moods, feelings, and urges to do or say things. Facts, reason, logic are not important. And what you're trying to get to is what some the thinkers would call a wise mind, where the wisdom within you, seeing the value of both reason and emotion, bringing left and right brain together. And so that's what this is. I'm going to bring up a picture for you from, and where is it? Okay. That's very helpful to me in thinking about some of this. And this is where emotional intelligence starts to come in to all of this. This is our brain, and the emotions that we feel and experience happen here at the spinal cord and the limbic system. It's the most primitive part of who we are, our emotions. That fight or flight. We were able to feel danger before we even rationally experience it. So your primary senses, the physical pathway for emotion starts in the brain at the spinal cord. And your primary senses hear and must travel to the front of your brain before you can think rationally about experience. But first they travel through the limbic system, the place where emotions are experienced. So what can happen to us is this part of our brain can hijack our behavior before we get to the rational part of the brain. So last week when I said sometimes your emotions hijack the rational part, that's what happens. So we experience and feel things well before we think about them. And many times, we think about anger, people going into anger management workshops, or we thinking about road rage. I just find this image very helpful to me when I think about emotions. And so when I had the mindfulness thing up there, this emotion mind, it is kind of, these emotions are coming at us. We're experiencing them. They happen, whether we want them or not. They're going to be there. We have almost no control over them. So how do we get to a wise mind? How do we do all this? And there's two sets of skills. What skills and how skills? I'm just going to talk generally about these. What skills have to do with observing, describing, and participating, and how skills are, we have to do things non-judgmentally, open-mindedly, and effectively. So the what skills are being able to observe, just notice the experience, be alert, observe things. If I ask you, or if I ask you to just sit there and maybe observe this computer screen that you're looking at, just be alert. What do you see? And then put into words the experience. And then how do you describe what you see or what you feel? And then how do you participate? How do you become in the present with what you're seeing or experiencing? To do all that effectively, you have to do it non-judgmentally. Don't evaluate what you see. Do only one thing at a time and keep your eye on objectives. So when we talk about being able to combine emotion and rational mind, we're talking about these two sets of skills. Before I elaborate more on them, just let me talk about this notion of the triangle of awareness. Right now, every single one of you has certain thoughts going through your head, you have certain emotions, and you have certain physical sensations. And are you able to stop and observe yourself in these three areas right now? What emotions are you feeling, and can you identify them? What thoughts are going through your head, and how's your body reacting? So sometimes when we ask you to pause and think, being able to just do this exercise of the triangle of awareness can help you whenever you feel your emotions overtaking or hijacking you, potentially. Can you pause, step back, and say, okay, I am really angry. My heart rate has increased. That's a physical reaction. I'm angry. The thoughts going through my head are, how could that stupid person drive in front of me like that? Just the act of me stepping back and being able to analyze the triangle of awareness is a pause to my action, taking another action maybe I don't want to take. All I'm saying is this triangle of awareness, and put that in your head as a way to begin to think about events and what is happening, or when you are going through stress. These three conditions are happening with us all the time. So think about this concept of triangle of awareness as I talk about mindfulness. And so going back to mindfulness, just some of the what skills are, again, think of the triangle of awareness. What do you observe? Notice your body's sensations. Pay attention to the present moment. Control your attention, but not what you see. Practice wordless watching. Watch thoughts come in and out of your mind and let them slip right by. Notice each feeling. Observe both inside. Describe. Put words on the experience. When a feeling or thought arises, or you do something, acknowledge it. Say in your mind, sadness has just enveloped me, or stomach muscles tightening, or a thought, I can do this. So basically, try and describe what's happening. A label, put a name to your feelings. One of the big things in developing your emotional intelligence is awareness of the emotions, being able to identify the actual emotion that you're going through. Many of us become skilled at denying emotions that we're going through. And try and participate. Throw yourself completely into activities of the current moment. Do not separate yourself from what is going on in the moment. Become one with whatever you're doing. Act intuitively from wise mind. Go with the flow. Multitasking is impossible, everyone. You can't do multitasking effectively. You're not in the moment. You're not in the flow. And then how to practice mindfulness is non-judgmentally. Don't evaluate. Take a non-judgmental stance. Facts. What? Not the good, the bad, the terrible, the should or should not. Just the facts. Unglue your opinions from the facts. Accept each moment. Acknowledge the helpful, the wholesome, but don't judge it. Acknowledge the harmful, the unwholesome, but don't judge it. When you find yourself judging, don't judge your judging. Open-mindedly, do one thing at a time. If other actions or thoughts or strong feelings distract you, let go of distractions and go back to what you were doing. Concentrate your mind, and etc. So I'm going to, what these are some basics of mindfulness. And I'll share these with you. And basically what I'm putting a model here is for, maybe it's reframing. It is a cognitive, it's more cognitions, but if you're going through stress, maybe take a mindful approach to it, and use some of these guides here. I will make these available to you. In fact, I'll put them in the current stress module. But I would recommend you maybe looking into mindfulness a little bit, and certainly looking more into emotional intelligence. What I'm asking you to do in this course quite a bit is reflection and stepping back. This notion of mindfulness is a way for you to step back in the moment. You're experiencing something and maybe pause. Always good to do a pause in life with other people before you send that email. You know, maybe you get real pissed off by an email you get. Instead of writing right back, go back to that triangle of awareness and maybe do what I'm suggesting here. Anyway, I wanted to introduce the concept of mindfulness to you. It's from some of the psychologists who write for a theory called cognitive behavioral therapy. So it's cognitive behavior. And as I said, it's been forming the basis of a lot of training that's been happening for teachers, for policemen, for firemen. People have found it has really improved a lot of people's awareness of what's going on in their own life, but it's improved relationships as well. So that completed an hour, and that's all I have. That's what I have for tonight. Next week, I'll be dealing with the topic of communication, and also next week, communication is chapter 4. So we jump over to chapter 4. The two assignments this week are there's a stress assignment. There's that worksheet. Also be thinking about a skill area you might want to work on as you look at all the skill areas from the self-awareness chapter and the stress management chapter. And if I can find it, I'll give you a list of some skill areas that students in other classes have worked on. Take a look at that assignment that deals with the analysis paper. That's the big, almost midterm type assignment. There are some sample papers there you can look at. All right, anyone have any thoughts or questions?